Sorry, I wasn't involved there for a minute.
Oh, that's fine. We were just introducing you and talking about how we've hired you to help us understand water, wastewater capacity, limitations related to that, opportunities to, expand capacity and what that means. I think the biggest question that's out there is what does that mean for phasing of the development at Brown Range? What's the capacity limit right now? How do you develop more supply? What's the timeline for that? Those are the types of things. And right now, I think we're just starting with sort of the baseline of kind of where we stand with the city's water system, City of Mount Vernon water system. So, if you won't mind going through your memo, that'd be very helpful.
No, I would like to. Yeah, thank you, and yeah, good morning, everybody. This is a memo that Ryan and I put together just to kind of, as you say, Jason, give us a baseline of where do we start. And I know we did pass this along, John, and I know, John, you were extremely busy last week and did get a chance to review this in detail. So it is a draft, but I would say at the onset that this is really a memo, again, to give us a baseline, and it's really a planning document. It's not a policy, it's not city policy by any means, but it gives us good information to answer the questions that you're bringing up. And what we did is we decided on this first memo to look at the summary of the 2019 City Water Supply Master Plan, because certainly that was a great document that did a lot of good work. And I think there's some things in here that I want to bring out and we can talk about. The first one is the supply. We talk about surface and groundwater with the city, and this is the city and district combined. And the 2019 master plan concluded that it was the yield from the water system that the city and district have is about 9,800 acre feet of water per year. And most of that originates from Fish Creek with the treatment plant and diversion system up there. That's a pretty good size, high elevation watershed supported by in-basin storage for 7,800 of that total contribution to the water supply. The balance is coming from a series of Yampa River wells. These are fairly shallow, high capacity infiltration gallery type constructions or horizontal well construction up there to give us the additional 2,000 acre feet for the total. That's where we stand today. That's what the production is from those sources. There's some expansion going on the wells that we can talk about in a little bit. I thought a couple of snapshots of information were important. The city and district residents per the report is 12,700. And then a couple of statistics here on existing water demands. What I gained out of the master plan is currently the district and the city divert on average on their baseline 2,650 acre feet per year. So just comparing that to the water yields available from those systems, you can see there 33.9% of the Fish Creek supply and 27% of both the Fish Creek and the wells together. Just a simple statistic. One thing I was interested in is the range of growth rates that were provided in the master plan, and it always is a range because nobody knows exactly, but it varied, from approximately 1.6% up to 2.4% of annual growth over an extended study period. Remember, this report was looking at water needs out to the year 2070, so it goes out quite a ways. But if we look at it that way, then even at full build out, if you pick the mid-range of growth at the year 2070, there would be about 6,800 acre feet of water demand by the city and district on average, not a peak day demand, but an average annual demand, to just give you a sort of a snapshot of where we are within the whole frame of the water system. In addition to that, there's storage supplies. City has a contract with the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District for water in Stagecoach Reservoir that can be released for purposes to supplement the flows of the Yampa River when needed. 552 acre feet, and as you know, they also secured, per the recommendations of the Applegate report, 1,200 acre feet of storage in the Elk River, which would be a very valuable supply if and when the city expands to a new diversion system on the Elk. The report, the master plan, talks about the water treatment capacity at Fish Creek. That's the ability of the city and district to treat the water supplies that are up there. And the report concludes that the current capacity is 7.5 million gallons per day. And I always think of in terms of CFS, so 11.5 cubic feet per second is the existing capacity. And it can be expanded by adding additional filter trains up there to 12 MGD or 18.5 cubic feet per second. And currently the Yampa wells add an additional 1.8 MGD to that treatment capacity to give you a feel what the total treatment of water supply is. Now the 2019 plan keeps track of what does the city and district need on a peak day basis during their high use months, because indeed that's the amount of water that you have to think about in terms of treatment. And so the Applegate report recommended that once the city and district get up to about 9 MGD, then it's time to upgrade that treatment facility. To give you a little feel for where we are today, to compare that to, it looks like what I can glean out of this report is we're currently about 5.8 MGD. So 5.8 now. When you reach about 9, you should think about upgrading that additional plant. The Applegate group projects that depending on the growth, that may occur in 2040 to 2050. Just depends on what comes online in the interim years. Then this last bullet, Ryan added this, the city and district anticipate that expansion will be paid by plant investment fees or TAP fees collected, and they're based on the plumbing units. And as Ryan stated, approximately $10,000 to $20,000 per unit. That just varies. That's where some of the money comes from to do these upgrades. So that would lead one to think that, boy, there's a lot of water up there in Fish Creek and the wells, and that's true, there is. But the conclusions and observations, we want to be a little cautious, and that is this: that Applegate concludes that the water supplies are adequate to meet the city and district demands at full build out, and then some, but with the caveat that there's no abnormal stresses on the system. And we've already talked about this, and I know everybody's quite tuned into this, and that is the concern or some of the vulnerability associated with relying quite a bit on Fish Creek should something happen with a fire or some other future concern or stress, such as climate change. So with that, despite that, the robust supply in the Fish Creek and the wells, their message to the city and district was, you do need to add a redundant water supply to the system to take care of that vulnerability. And the report recommends, it's needed now. It's not Brown Ranch or any other annexation. It's something that they recommended that the city and district just kind of work toward itself. And that leads me to at the top of the next page is the future water supplies. And this is also something we talked about a little bit at the last focus group, and that the meeting, that the city does have water rights in the Elk River, 8 cubic feet per second. They're relatively junior water rights, that is, they're lower in seniority compared to some of the senior agricultural water rights in the lower Elk. But they do have a good water right to support a plant backed up by that 1,200 acre feet of storage in Steamboat Lake that we talked about. It's my understanding on that second bullet point that in 2017, there was an opinion, a very general reconnaissance level opinion that such a plant could cost, upwards of $15 to $20 million. And further, just to note in the Applegate report again, which recommended the city and district proceed along this path line, cautioned that such a plant could take 7 years to fully develop between all of the initial design and collection of water quality data, et cetera, that you need before you actually can get around to constructing the plant. So it's a 7-year build out according to Applegate. This next one, just kind of a reminder of where we were or where the city it was with the last proposal. And well, I'm sorry, let me back up. This is the water distribution information that Ryan put in. Ryan, are you there? Is Ryan active? Okay.
I am, Scott. Well, sorry, I'm having some IT issues, but I'm here on my phone.
I just wondered if would you like, if you had a copy of that memo in front of you, would you like to run the group through the water distribution section that you prepared?
Sure. So the site is currently served. There's a 12-inch water main that runs across the site, and that delivers water from the city to the Steamboat 2 Metro District. In addition, the city's got a number of projects going on to increase their ability to distribute water to the west side of town. Those include the construction of a new 1 million-gallon water tank on the west side of town off of Route County Road 129. I believe that's slated to be complete this summer. The city is also in the design process for a 12-inch water main that would run along Highway 40 from approximately Snowbowl down to Sleepy Bear. This would provide an additional and redundant distribution system to the Brown Ranch. And then finally, the Overlook subdivision, which is currently under construction. As part of their approved construction plans, they're constructing a distribution throughout their whole subdivision, but one of the features it includes is a connection down to a water main in West End Village. So that would provide additional redundancy and transmission capability. As a standard practice, basically all development is required to install the infrastructure that they need for their development. So that's, mains, services, fire hydrants, pressure reducing valves. And so that's just a standard requirement that the city has for all development projects. And then last week there was some discussion about gray water systems. There are currently, to my knowledge, no gray water systems or non-potable irrigation systems active in the city. That this is part of the city's infrastructure. So those may be possibilities, but they would also generally come with additional infrastructure costs.
No, thanks, Ryan. And I know we threw a lot out there in a short period of time, and maybe rather than me saying any more, I would pause Jason into the group for discussion, questions, wherever we want to go with that.
Yeah, I think Webb had a couple of thoughts since he's jumped on. If he wants
okay.
And then, yeah, we can kind of wrap up that talk and then talk about kind of what does this mean? Because that's a lot of information. But what is it telling us? And maybe John Snyder can help recap that a little bit for us as well. So.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Am I coming through? I'm sitting in an airport far, far away. I just hope you can hear me.
Sound good. Sound great.
All right, thanks, Scott. As I recall, the master plan projected that supply in a drought year. Is that correct? Is that an average year? You know, a lot of the community is concerned about what they hear about a drier future, over appropriation, et cetera, et cetera. How confident are we that those yields are are going to be reliable? Can we hang our hat on that? What are your thoughts on those issues?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, good question. As I recall, what the Applegate did on the Fish Creek water supply system is they did model it. And so they looked at both direct flow diversions available at the diversion intake and the available storage that the district and the city have up in Fish Creek Basin. And every time then that Fish Creek flows get a little bit low in terms of being able to provide diversion and or the 2 CFS minimum flow, as I recall, down the creek, then they would release storage. And the what I recall is that the 7,800 acre feet tagged to the Fish Creek supply was an iteration of years, and that focused on the dry year. And I can't recall if that was a 77 or 78 dry year or one of the more recent dry years that we've had. So I guess what I would answer that question is it correctly, at least as I recall, focused on the dry year. What that doesn't do, of course, is to put in the climate change concerns. At least I don't believe it did. And John, I know you're listening. If I'm going off base here, you remember anything differently, please jump in or set me straight. But so I'm pretty comfortable with the fact that Fish Creek has the supply for additional development over and above the existing city water needs now and in the future and at build out. And Webb, this was the same conclusion I independently reached when I was doing the analysis of this property prior to this. My numbers were a little bit less than Applegate, but yet the overall conclusion was the same, that it looked to me like even in the dry year, the Fish Creek and the wells could support what the city and district need in the future for themselves for infill growth, plus possibly then, up to the city and district whether they want to expand and serve other areas or not. Does that help, Webb, or did I confuse it?
Oh, no, I think I knew the answer, but the public is concerned about closures on the river every summer with low flows in the Yampa. They read about the Colorado River drying up. They read about a drier climate. They read about overappropriation, and that just creates concerns that I believe we need to address. It's certainly not easy to explain all that, but their concerns are valid. They're based upon their sources of information, and our challenge is to allay their fears in some way and show them that supply is adequate for the future.
No, that's right. And you touched on another unknown, and that is the Colorado River Compact. And if that trigger is pulled, what happens at that point? And that's a little bit of unknown. I think, as you know, Webb, probably from your discussions internally that you've had with the district. But there could be some external stresses put on the system. I think one of the biggest assets that the city has in their arsenal, which was very thoughtful, and that is the 552 acre feet of storage in Stagecoach is huge. In that, as I think most people realize, that water in Stagecoach is stored during the peak runoff when the snow melts and there's a lot of water in the river, and then it's available for use in drier years. Now, that water can be used for a variety of purposes. And if, as the Yampa River goes down, I think the city uses some of that supply now to help with dilution and temperature control at their wastewater treatment plant. But that upstream storage is extremely valuable to the city, as is the 1,200 acre feet of Steamboat Lake. I think anything that you can do to get those supplies out of storage, where you can collect them in the peak runoff, is ideal.
I guess just one last comment. Ryan mentioned that there are no non-potable irrigation systems currently within the city, and they have to be a certain size to make sense. You know, the city irrigates some parks, but I just wonder if in this neighborhood there's some reusable effluent or junior Yampa rights or a yet to be converted ag right that the city may own. I think in their master plan they said there were some pretty good rights that are going unused. I just wonder if that might be a source for non-potable irrigation. You know, it has to pencil out. I don't know if the savings in tap fees for the irrigation component of every tap would justify spending what it would take to pump and pipe and maintain a non-potable system. But you're seeing more and more of that, particularly on the Front Range. And everybody knows that it's getting harder and harder to treat water to the drinking standards. So at some point, I hope we can take a look at that possibility.
And Webb, I think that's really a good idea and something that should be looked at. You know, in looking at the information in the 2019 city district plan, you can kind of think of it this way, that 30% of all the water diverted and treated by those entities goes to irrigation and 70% goes to in-house. And that's just kind of a rule of thumb based off of their baseline operation. So one thing that could, you know, there's a range of things to look at new development. You know, it could be maybe your goal is to endeavor to drop that 30% of your total demand to something less, if possible. Go on a raw water supply, I think, is what you're suggesting. We look at Webb, and that is also a possibility. Just a couple of. I'm just getting a little bit of a rebound. If you guys can hear me, I'll continue.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. So the city is using some raw water for irrigation in their parks department, and for instance, snowmaking at Halson Hill, and the ski area uses raw water for their snowmaking. And what I meant to say was that there's no public system currently that I know of that, you know, an individual property owner can tap into to use raw water for irrigation on their property.
No, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, but a raw water system for some irrigation could be very, very helpful. When people think of raw water irrigation, it's been my experience, you know, they can think of, okay, should we bring an independent raw water source into this development and actually run water lines to the various homes or apartments and whatever the green space is, and, you know, almost have a separate tap on the side of the house with a faucet that you open for a hose, etc. That's one way to do it. Some of the cautions of that is, you know, when you have a lot of children around and things, those hose bibs that's not treated water. So, you don't want anybody, you know, ingesting that. That's just some of the discussion I've been involved with. Or the other one is to bring raw water into, say, a small pond for distribution to whatever this development or other development with, you know, even infill within the city. What is there? Small parks? Is there soccer fields? Is there things like that would really be conducive to a raw water system? That might be important, because that's the kind of thing that you could implement and drop that statistic that I would mention, that 30% of irrigation use, down a bit. So those are all just good thoughts on how to do that. And then Webb, your idea of a water right is a good one, and or even a junior right backed up by by some storage and stagecoach or other would be something that might be prudent to look at.
I think as we get into this, I think the practical question that we're going to be asked by some of the other teams that are working on this is like, what's the budget that we have for water within the existing treatment supply, within some measure of infrastructure improvements that need to be made to get to an area. And plus we know we have this big infrastructure improvement to create this water supply on the Elk. So is it as simple to say that we could create some easily understandable budget that says, you know, with no changes to the current system, we've got this much capacity. You do these 3 infrastructure projects, you've got this much, you know, X plus whatever capacity, and then, you know, to bring on the Elk River storage, obviously is another huge capital investment, but that adds even more capacity. I feel like those are the types of practical answers that we're looking to come out of these focus teams, is understand the nuance, but ultimately get to some type of understanding that's easily digestible, because we've got million acre feet, we've got CFS, we've got, you know, whatever it is, you know, maybe it's not million acre feet, it's a million gallons per day and acre feet of water and all of that sort of stuff, which is sort of difficult for anyone to understand, and how that relates to the development of the site. So I think that's a challenge that we have as a group, is to try to take this fairly complex information and distill it down into some metrics that are easily understood. And there's probably a lot of assumptions that might be built into that, but I think that's our challenge.
The tap fees, those don't support the development at all? Or would do a portion of the tap fees go to the development infrastructure, or does it all go to the city, I suppose?
I'll let John explain where tap fees go. They go to his large bank accounts at the city.
That's right. Yeah. Morning, everyone. This is John Snyder with the city. So the tap fees are used mostly to pay for expansion of the water treatment plants and the wastewater treatment plant. Some of it also does go to distribution system expansions, but tap fees do not go to pipes in the ground associated with a particular development. That's how they're currently designed. And Jason, to kind of answer your overarching question, first off, Scott and Ryan did an excellent job with that overview. I pretty much agree with all of it. What this distills down into is we have about an 800 equivalent residential unit threshold that we could probably serve right now with, you know, relatively modest distribution system improvements. Once we're at and beyond that 800 units, that's when we're going to need that Elk River supply online. So that's kind of the key figure we're looking at right now is 800. And, you know, let's say Brown Ranch can construct 100 units a year. That means, you know, we've got 8 years to get it up and running from the time that Brown Ranch starts construction. So hopefully that helps.
I just had a question about that. When you say units, John, does that mean any kind of unit?
Yeah, so
an apartment, you know, a building of apartments, each apartment is a unit, a single family home. How does that translate?
And that's an excellent question. So in order to create a common variable, what we do in the water industry is we create what's called an equivalent residential unit. And there's any number of ways you can define an equivalent residential unit, but perhaps the easiest way to conceptualize the way we've defined it is a 2,500 square foot house with 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms with an average yard. So that gives everybody an idea in their head about what we say when we say EQR or equivalent residential unit. Now, an apartment, you could probably get 2 to 2.5 apartments for that same level of house from a water use standpoint.
I think that's really helpful because, and it's also really encouraging in a way, because if you build, I mean, I hope we build more than 100 units a year, but we're not going to build, you know, I mean,
We're not going to build 800.
right. So anyway, it feels like we've got time.
But if this may be an opportunity for us to develop a BRU, like a Brown Ranch unit.
Yeah.
That would have some tie to what your EQR is, or whatever that's called, equivalent residential unit. And so that way we can have a little bit of a better understanding, because it is, you're right, based on that assumption, like you said, John, a 2,500 square foot house, it's a yard. Well, through the sustainability team, you know, we're talking about how to be smarter with water conservation.
That's, you know, if there were, I'm not saying it's, you know, that may be one, apartment buildings, kind of, I mean, it feels like you could stretch that 800 units pretty far with a variety of housing that at least we're hearing anecdotally is going to be desired.
Yeah.
That's all.
I have a question about the long-term growth rate assumption of 1.8% per year. Does the Brown Ranch and all the units anticipated there, is that included? Of course, it didn't exist as a concept when this study was done, but is that 1.8 growth rate per year realistic?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's why Applegate put a range of something less than that to something over that. And I just picked 1.8 because it was in the middle. That's a lot of growth over a long range. And, you know, and whether that really happens or not, you know, I don't know. I was just trying to see if I had at that one point, at that growth rate, if you start out, as I mentioned earlier, with a population of 12,700, by the year 2070, that would be up to 33,000 people within the city and district. So that's a lot of people. Well, that's sort of subjective. It seems like a lot if we have continued growth at that. But so I think it's just a planning tool to be conservative. You know, there's going to be infill within the city, and district, and they're going to be needing some of the water supplies. But I can jump in and maybe help out just a second with some of that discussion on the EQRs. And John Snyder, again, rein me in here, but what I did is I did take that EQR example of the 2,500 square foot home, 3-bedroom, average yard, etc. And based upon standard water use assumptions, I put that into what would the demand of 800 EQRs be over the course of the year. And please take this as an initial draft discussion only planning, but it does get us talking about this kind of thing. That would be about 160 acre feet of water per year. If you convert that 800 EQRs to what does it require? And then to answer, just to get the discussion, what could that support? That could support, you know, on an example only, picking this out of the blue. But we'd be talking about a couple hundred single family homes, 175 apartments, the additional 1-bedroom units, if you'd like that, 20,000 square feet of commercial, a 30,000 square foot grocery store, and irrigated acreage of 20. Nothing magic about that. No one has given me any information on that. I anticipated this question coming up, and I just wanted to throw that out. And so there is room. I mean, 800 EQRs represents some room for future development.
Scott, John, I'm curious, this 800 units, is that a function of the ability of the distribution system to get the water to the Brown Ranch, or is it a function of the annual yield? What is it that dictates the 800 treatment capacity, MGD, acre feet per year? What metric are we using there?
Yeah, great question, Webb. The limiting factor for this location is actually the distribution system capacity. So it's not the firm yield of the drainage basins. It's not the treatment plant capacities. It is the distribution system capacity that tends to limit us.
So that's why the Elk River plant is critical to relieve the pipes that are in the ground from Fish Creek all the way out to the airport. There's just not enough pipe without some significant pressure loss and fire flows and other issues to maintain the service level that the city needs.
Correct. Yeah, pipes, pumps, and tanks. That's right.
That's a good clarification, because my question kind of along the lines of what Kathleen is getting at is, you have some budget for infill. Now, there's probably some EQR infill budget that's different than the 800, I would imagine. And then the question I would have is, if you know the Elk River supply is coming on board, is any of that infill capacity that maybe is utilized ever available as like a buffer? Or is that maybe the limitations in distribution make it such that that's just not possible?
Yeah, that does assume an infill budget that's pretty much built out of all the vacant land within the city limits. I think the infill budget assumed about 1 million gallons a day of water for the remaining vacant parcels. So the 800 would be on top of the infill.
Is that, let's just say as an example, we start going down this road and we get 3/4 of the way through the process of getting the Elk River supply moving, right? It's construction crews are going, everything's firmed up. We hit that 800 unit mark and it's not, we don't have Elk River supply on board yet. Is there some headroom within the infill that would allow us to continue to develop, knowing that you're essentially bringing back on that additional, you're sort of gaining back that credit that you're using on the infill once the Elk River supply comes on board? Is that something that we could consider? Because I feel like this major infrastructure investment in the Elk River system presents an opportunity for delivery of units to sort of lag at some point. If we develop too fast, as an example, if we develop 200 units a year, in 4 years, we're done. And maybe the construction timeline for the Elk River diversion is a 6-year timeline. Now we've got 2 years of just sort of waiting.
Or is on-site storage another option?
Yeah, and maybe this is too nuanced of a conversation for what we've got going on now, but it seems to me that this is a huge component of our ability to deliver units to the community. And so we want to make sure that we're understanding, how all those infrastructure investments layer into it. So we need to get started on something now. Let's know that now.
What's the process for getting the Elk River water distribution thing going? I mean, is that through the city or through the, how do you even start that? John?
Just a couple hard-hitting questions.
I mean, I'm just curious. Well, I think that's a question. If we determine that that's needed to, we got to be able to answer the question of, well, how do we get that done?
I'll take a stab at this one. So understanding, of course, that everything I say could always be overridden by city council. My professional opinion is that the city should be responsible for that Elk River plant. It is our area of expertise, so we would work towards making that a reality. And I'd say we crossed the biggest hurdle already, and the biggest hurdle was the firm yield of the Elk River. And we were able to secure that perpetual storage contract out of Steamboat Lake 2 summers ago. So that's done. The next major hurdle is purchasing the land for the plant. And then design and construction could then follow.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I was just gonna, this is Ryan. I was just gonna add that I kind of want to emphasize a point that John made there that, so the Applegate report is a planning tool that the city of Mount Warner commissioned to help them plan for the future. But there's a second part to that, which is actually policy. And that's something city staff helps implement and formulate, but it's ultimately up to the discretion of city council. And so as Brown Ranch looks to develop and get water from the city's existing supply and water rights, that's a policy decision that will ultimately be made by city council.
That's absolutely right, Ryan. And I imagine the discussion at the community level really isn't going to be, hey, who's responsible for building it? It's how do we divvy up the cost? And so I think that's really the community discussion that we're headed towards.
800 units bring 15 million. If there's a $15,000 tap fee each.
Potentially.
Let me pull out my calculator.
I mean, I'm sure that 15 to 20 million estimate's probably gone up to 40 now. For a new.
Yeah. So that 800 units, $15,000, that's 12 million.
And so you will find in that memo too, there's a reference to the annexation agreement that Steamboat West Neighborhoods negotiated with the city. And that included payments in addition to the tap fees to help pay for some of this infrastructure.
Who's that? Sorry.
So it's Ryan Scott said, he's one of our.
No, the West Steamboat neighborhood.
Oh, who is that?
Yeah.
That was the previous annexation.
So that will be Brown Range.
Yeah, it's the same site.
Okay.
Or it's a component of the same site. That was approved for annexation, but the city didn't do it actually.
So that was a long time ago.
No, it was just 4 years ago. Yeah. So there was Steamboat 700, which was the original annexation, which included the entire Brown Ranch site and another 160 acres adjacent to it. That was approved with referendum. Citizens said no. Then later on, West Steamboat neighborhoods came in with a 190 acre annexation, which is entirely encompassed in the 536 acres of the Brown Ranch. And that was approved, but then they never moved forward.
But this land is encumbered with that agreement now?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not encumbered by that agreement. It's just informing a way that the city and the developer have worked out to pay for this. The thing that I think we have at our advantage is that there's infrastructure money coming down the line from the feds into the state that may be utilized to help us pay for this.
And a lot of it is earmarked towards water.
Yeah.
Water infrastructure.
Yeah, so from that standpoint, good timing to hopefully be able to get some grant funding to help us pay for this, so that maybe each house doesn't have to have an additional $15,000 put on it. And that gets to affordability. And so that's sort of part of the conversation that we're having, because we obviously have a mandate to deliver units to the local population that's affordable. How we do that, understanding there's lots of costs. And it's hard to just like pass it to somebody else, you know, but if we can find that like free money flowing down from the feds, we'll take it.
So this is really, really great stuff. I'm very optimistic in hearing that we at least potentially have, you know, the ability for 800 ERQs. I think we've kind of answered that current capacity today in a rough draft, Scott, thank you. I'm hoping that in our last here, you know, 15, 20 minutes that we could possibly tackle a rough draft number of that, of a future potential capacity, then a realistic capacity, and then go down the path of a few of the things that what needs to happen to serve the first home. Does anyone have that kind of ability? And obviously in a draft form, but I think what we're all trying to do at some point is put some bookends on what are limitations and what possibly can be done here, and find that least common denominator, whether that's water, roads, electricity, etc. Can anyone help fill in those gaps of the maximum future potential capacity and a realistic capacity based on the things we know now?
So speaking just from the water side of things, once the Elk River right is online, that is sized to supply the full build out of the West Steamboat Springs area plan. So every unit that the WASAP considered, once the Elk River right is online, you know, we're good to go. As far as what we need to do from a water standpoint to serve the first house, three things. One is the West Area Water Tank, which should be online this summer. Two is that water line along US 40, and that'll be built in conjunction with the Core Trail extension, which will probably be either in 2023 or 2024. And then three, the last thing is you'll need the on-site infrastructure within the subdivision itself. So those are the three things you need to service the first house.
Yeah, I want to take a moment to recognize how much work the city's done to set us up for success here.
Absolutely.
The work that they've done on the water tank on the west side of town has been 6 or so years in the making. The work that they've done over the last several years on firming up the Elk River right, like those are very forward-thinking investments that the city has made to help us be in a better position today. And so the city, they get a lot of flack for how expensive the tap fees are and just being the city. But they deserve an applause for their foresight on this. I want to make that really clear, because quite honestly, the work to add that water line, that engineering is being done right now. And that's something that we didn't have to do. Like they're hiring that at their own expense to make that happen. And if we can put some horsepower behind getting those things in, we should do that. To help, meet them where they brought the project to.
I'm actually, so new to this, not understanding, I don't have any expertise or even a little knowledge in water. And I am kind of really pleasantly surprised at how much is already in place and the attention on redundancy from the city's standpoint. I mean, just as a citizen of Steamboat Springs, that makes me feel really good. So just reinforce.
And Mike, this is Ryan. To answer your question on the high end, and what John mentioned is that the Steamboat West area plan, I think, had 3,800 units in it.
Hey, John, Ed MacArthur here. Just a quick question in terms of, so let's take for 2021, do you know what the EQRs of residents were done this year within the city?
I heard that number a couple weeks ago and now I can't remember it, but the building official did have that number available and I have it somewhere in an email.
I thought I heard it was about 52 is the number that I heard that was being passed around. I have no idea if that's credible or not.
That sounds right.
So I guess one of the things in just the conversation that's going on, when you think about that, I believe that this was close to being a record-setting year in construction in our community, and that's 52 units within the city. So when you start talking about 100 units, I think we have to manage the expectations of what's realistically feasible to accomplish. And I know we got a lot of expectations here, but that number is kind of humbling. If you think you have 800 available, that's quite a few years of construction work.
That's an excellent point, Ed. I think our limiting factor from a pace standpoint really is contractor availability.
Yeah, and in the current economic environment around the country, that probably doesn't bode well for a lot of new groups coming in. But anyway, even if we had quite a few extra groups when we had that availability, we weren't hitting that 52 number over that period of time. So just something for everybody to keep in mind.
He's a character stuff.
That's great.
0.4% growth rate.
Yeah,
record.
really great. Good one. Good one to put a number on that 1.8. Ed. Nice job there. And John, thank you so much for when you said what needs to be happen to serve the first home, you did mention the water aspects of it. Can this team take our final maybe 5 minutes here to consider those other parts and pieces that are also needed? One of which I'm assuming annexation doesn't necessarily tie it to the water piece, but annexation will need to be done as well. Can we think of the other things that are necessary to get the water to the property and have it serviceable? Anything in addition to annexation?
Well, I think the other thing that's that's missing from this is probably the wastewater conversation of what's the capacity within the existing wastewater treatment plant, its ability to expand, the thresholds at which you need to create another one and or replace or what, I don't know the situation there. I think that's probably another limiting factor, because once we get the water to the homes, now you have another problem that you have to deal with, which is figuring out how to deal with all of the effluent. Did you have any sense of that, John?
Yeah, so the sewer collection system, we've got the pipe extended up basically to the doorstep, so it's ready to roll. The treatment plant is currently at about 72% capacity. So we've got, let's see, we have to start designing expansion when we hit, I think it's 80% capacity, and then we have to start constructing expansion when it's at 95% capacity.
Is that a simple, like adding another train of treatment, or is it like a whole new facility?
No, it would be adding more trains to the existing station. So no need for a new facility, just more aeration basins, more clarifiers, more digesters.
And so you have the space for that, I assume.
Yep.
Being out there, I mean, it's a lot of space.
Yeah.
So that doesn't, is that 70% capacity, is that ultimately more or less than the 800 EQRs from the water? Is that a more limiting factor or less of a limiting factor?
Good question. I could calculate it out pretty quick after this meeting and text it to you.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Yep.
Because I think those are the two big, city utility components of this. We also have stormwater that we need to talk about, which is, I think, the topic for another day. And then I think, John, you hit the nail on the head. How do we pay for all of this is probably the biggest question. And I think that's ultimately going to be part of the annexation conversation. That's usually 99% of what you talk about in an annexation request. So, how do we make sure that all of the impacts are being paid for and who's paying for them? I think, Mike, just checking in, I would say your goal of getting some bookends, I think we've definitely hit that, and we'll be getting a little bit more information to help us fill that in. I think that's really useful.
Absolutely. Any other comments today, or anyone from the general public that has anything to add or a concern? We always want to leave a couple minutes for concerns that anyone might have, or we're going to try and compile this information so that everyone has it visual to sort of believe or disbelieve or disprove, if you will. We're trying to do our best to get the factual numbers on there, but we always want everybody's voice to be heard and concerns to be heard as well. Anybody have anything to add at this time?
This is Chris Murphy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Okay, appreciate the discussion on the gray water that was raised up at the last meeting. One of the things to consider, it's not just the public space that should be looked at, but rather for individual homes, and this might, with a goal of decreasing the number of gallons a house would use, that ultimately hope would, with all the budget and stuff, but if an individual home is plumbed and ready for a gray water recycle process, then you can save definitely on flushing toilets and the cold water in your wash and potentially outside irrigation, and obviously there's concerns with that. But for any of that to happen, at least for the individual homes, Routt County needs to adopt the Regulation 86. And so I don't know if this esteemed group or the sustainability group or whoever would help lead the charge to get Routt County off the dime to say, all right, this is getting serious. We need to get this in place for individual homes.
Awesome, thank you, Chris. I noted that from our first meeting of your comment about that, and it is duly noted again, and we will kind of possibly tackle that some on our group and also push that off to the sustainability group as well. Eli, one additional comment, and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah, kind of on the same line, I think, you know, at least for the common areas, the gray water system is something that probably would end up paying for itself over the life of the development. You know, I think it's something that really ought to be looked at, you know, paying to put potable water in the ground. And then also, you know, we're building in a desert, so.
Yeah, okay. Excellent. Well, great job, everybody. Thank you to all the consultants, John, amazing work and generally kind of positive information as well. So thank you all very much for your hard work, and we will see everybody at the next meeting. The next meetings are posted on the website under the infrastructure team. That is updated and accurate. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. And if anybody has any thoughts after this game or after this meeting, just feel free to shoot us emails with your thoughts. We're cataloging all of those comments, and so if something pops in your head 3 hours from now, you know, don't let it go to waste. Send it our way, and we'll make sure that gets included.
People